Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Renick. I'm the senior broker, the team lead with Team Renick Real Estate Services. We're part of that great Keller Williams on the Water Sarasota family serving the west coast of Florida. It is Wednesday, August 29th. You know, it's hard to believe. Summer is all over, almost all over. And for Floridians, you can't really tell by looking outside the window. But for many folks, the leaves will start changing. The kids are going back to school. So this is a significant shift into the fall or the autumn time. It's just hard to believe that summer's already passed. Our hope when we bring these live, Facebook Live videos to you or broadcasts is to help educate and inform buyers and sellers of topics that are important to you. So the real estate process, when you do engage, goes smoother. So on Wednesdays, we have Title Time with Mike and Mike. And I'm physically holding up the introduction that I use for Mike, but I'm not going to use it. That ought to scare him. He's waiting. He can hear me right now. You can't see him, but I can in my software. Let me say this about Mr. Hankin. He's an attorney at Hankin & Hankin, a very local and prestigious law firm. Him and his wife are partner attorneys, and they are, in my opinion, the best of the best. That's why I reached out to Mike and asked him to partner with us on these kind of shows. So let me, if I hit the right button here. There we go. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Mike. How are you today?
I am doing great for an old man on a Wednesday morning. How are you doing as a young man?
Well, my former partner used to tell me that he was doing well by doing good. So I'm going to adopt what he's saying, used to say, and I'll tell you I'm doing well by doing good this morning.
I like that. Well, can you believe, though, summer is almost over? Have your kids gone back to school?
They have. You know, it's amazing. You blink your eyes and they're 3 feet larger.
Did I see that smile get wider on your face when I said kids back in school?
You did. I mean, they're just wonderful. They're neat little guys. It's fun every morning.
Excellent. Very good. Well, Michael, today we decided to talk about FIRPTA, and that's an acronym that I use daily in my business, and I couldn't spell it out the long way if I had to. So I'm going to turn this over to you and ask you to discuss FIRPTA and why it's important to understand.
Sure. So as you mentioned, this morning we're going to be talking about FIRPTA, which is the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. So I'm going to do my best to discuss a little bit of taxes without putting anybody to sleep this morning. Generally, FIRPTA requires that non-residents withhold and remit 15% of their sales price to the IRS. Now, this withholding requirement is actually, believe it or not, put on the buyer, and there's a lien on the buyer's property for the payment of those taxes if they're not paid. And as you can imagine, most buyers are not familiar with FIRPTA, how to withhold and remit the taxes, and how to make sure everything's handled properly. This is one reason that it's important, especially with a seller who's a foreigner, to have a closing attorney who represents the buyer. Here, most likely, the closing attorney is going to be making sure that the funds are properly transmitted to the IRS, that any necessary forms, which is a 8288 form from the IRS, is properly remitted. Because as I mentioned, if it's not remitted timely, there's a lien on the buyer's property for the payment of these taxes. So first in this test, in the FIRPTA analysis, we ask whether or not a foreigner is subject to FIRPTA. And generally, to not be subject to FIRPTA, you either have to be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien with a green card. There's some exceptions to that, but generally the seller has to have the right to live here permanently. If they don't have the right to live here permanently, odds are they're going to be subject to FIRPTA and subject to the 15% withholding. Now, how is a buyer supposed to know whether or not a seller is a foreign citizen? Well, the IRS has done its best to address that, and they provide that if the seller provides an affidavit that they are in fact a U.S. legal resident and have the right to reside here permanently, no withholding is necessary. What's kind of funny is This law was invented to prevent foreigners from committing tax fraud, from selling their property, leaving the country, and not paying their taxes. And the IRS just has this form that says, hey, seller, if you sign this affidavit, you don't have to do any withholding. Well, if a seller foreigner is going to commit tax fraud, odds are they're going to lie on a form as well. But I digress. It's a little silly how that's set up, but if a seller is willing to sign the affidavit, the property is free and clear of the lien and doesn't have to have the withholding done.
Let me ask you a question here, if I may, Michael.
Sure.
So when we talk about exceptions, I'm not talking about loopholes, but in addition to declaring, if a foreign seller, is there a way they can legally have a social security number, and does that help them with this issue at all?
So having a social security number by itself does not fix the issue. Generally, foreigners don't have social security numbers. They have tax identification numbers, which they can be given if they run a business or otherwise have any income in the States. The IRS will give them that tax ID number to remit and pay their taxes. But usually the problem is that tax ID number is a 9-digit number, looks just like a social security number. So if you're given a 9-digit number from that seller, you don't always know if it's a social security number or a tax identification number. So just the existence of the number isn't enough for a buyer to make the determination. The buyer really needs the affidavit from the seller attesting to the fact that they are not a foreigner.
So to kind of summarize this, because this is a very important topic, if this is missed at closing, a lien gets put on the buyer's property or the new owner. Is that correct, Michael?
Absolutely. And that's, as I mentioned before, why you want somebody representing your interests handling the closing, making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. You wouldn't want the seller's attorney deciding whether or not there's a loophole or maybe a way to skirt around the withholding requirement, because that seller's attorney's obligations would be to that foreign seller.
As I continue to practice real estate, my belief is education every day and learning every day. And I'm drawing some conclusions. The time that you and I have spent together talking on these Facebook Lives, the question comes up, should a buyer or a seller pay for and provide title insurance with the transaction? And the more I think about it, the more I learn from you. If I was a buyer and there was a chance of FIRPTA and also not knowing how to read a title report and things like that, we're asked all the time, should we hire an attorney? I think more often than not now, buyers ought to really think about, for the few dollars it costs to get title insurance through an attorney such as yourself, to me, it just makes a lot of sense to protect that investment. Would you agree with that, Michael?
Without a doubt. I try to make analogies to things that people are more familiar with. So I like to use the buying a car analogy. If you went to buy a car and you wanted to have it checked out first, you wouldn't use the seller's mechanic. You would use your own mechanic who's loyal to you and is going to be honest to you. And that analogy applies whether it's the physical condition of the car or the title to the car. You wouldn't want the seller's attorney, for instance, telling you that they have good title to the car and there's no liens on it. You want your own attorney doing that. And so, yes, I couldn't emphasize how important it is enough to have your own attorney representing you as a buyer in a real estate transaction.
May I make up an absurd but interesting analogy?
Sure, absolutely.
If you're accused of robbing a bank, you probably do not want the prosecuting attorney to represent you on the defense side. Would that be a correct statement?
That would be a correct statement. Absolutely. It's good legal advice.
Which I'm not allowed to provide, so we're not going to call it legal advice. I'm allowed to tell stories. But maybe having you on here, I can get out of jail card kind of thing. But Mike, is there anything else you want to add about, again, FIRPTA, a very important topic. We have a lot of folks in this part of Florida that are owners of property that are not United States citizen. We thrive in that market in terms of second and third and fourth homes. So this is germane to the audience that we serve. Is there anything we need to bring up? Anything else to talk about, Mike?
Well, there's a couple of little wrinkles that come along with that 15% withholding requirement. If you're a seller, you're going to want to take that into account, and you're going to want to say, do I have enough equity in this property to pay all of my closing expenses and the withholding, and if there's a mortgage on the property, to pay that as well. We don't see it quite as much these days, but back in 2012, 2013, we saw where the FIRPTA withholding put a seller over the amount that they would expect to receive. So they would have to bring money to closing. It's not 15% of the net proceeds, it's 15% of the gross proceeds. So it's something a buyer and an agent should be aware about, or rather a seller and the seller's agent should be aware when they're in the process of selling a property. It's something to look at, make sure you know of. Also, it's something that as a buyer's attorney checking the title, I can find that out relatively early in the process. So we don't get to the closing date and then the seller finds out a day or two ahead of time they need money. We find out at the beginning when we pull the title and we see the liens and encumbrances and we find out whether or not the seller is a foreigner. We do those calculations at the beginning to avoid problems. So if you're not going to hire a law firm that does that, you need to make sure that you do those things yourself. There's a few ways to get around the exemptions, but we won't need to delve into those this morning. If there's questions on those, of course, you can call me anytime, and I'm always happy to discuss.
Let me put the contact information up on the screen right now. The reason I partner with Mr. Hankin is I met Mike quite a few years ago when I first came to Florida, but his business practices align exactly with what I've always been taught. So when you reach out to either one of us, so Michael's phone number is up there, you reach out to Michael for the legal issues. From a real estate perspective, I'm willing to help. The key is it's not always necessary about engagement. So you may not necessarily be a buyer or seller right now. You may not be ready to hire an attorney. You may not be ready to hire a real estate agent, but you still can reach out to either one of us for our respective areas of expertise because we do want to help. It's important to get the right information out there and just make sure we're meeting your needs. Michael, you agree with that approach?
Absolutely.
So next week, we're probably, let me share this when Michael's on the screen, we probably will not be here. I've been served with a summons for jury duty, and I used a free pass last time I was served, so this time I'm sure that they're going to leverage my background on a jury selection. So next Wednesday is my reporting day, so we will take 1 week off. We will return again on, let me see what we've got. It would be September 12th. Wow, September 12th already. That's amazing. So, Michael, I want to thank you. We'll continue to prepare a list of topics. For those of you that are watching live or may see this recording, if you have a topic that you would like us to discuss, we want to do that. Reach out to either one of us. Our contact information, again, is on the screen, and we'd be happy to address that in a future Title Time with Mike and Mike. That make sense, Michael?
Absolutely. And as you said, if there's any topics, please let us know. We'd be happy to cover them.
Michael, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and I truly, truly appreciate you helping to get the right words out there. So I will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.